When I came back from San Francisco, I was surprised that Als Bar was a shell of its former self. It wasn't vibrant. It was dark and cold and really quite depressing. It was after the riots, and I couldn't believe what Als Bar had become, because I had played there in bands before I moved away, and I always got the idea that it was a hotbed. It would fill up every night. And when I went there, and it was just a sad, dark, cold place with a television on that didn't have good reception, I was like, what happened? I think that I revived something that had already possibly had its greatest moment and made a second great moment, or possibly a fifth great moment, because it had already had several lives before I put my energy into it. Stacy was a goddess. She made Als Bar tolerable. It's like a tree in the middle of a desert. She made everything okay, no matter how horrible the band was, how warm the beer was, how sticky the floor was, and how bad it smelled. She would make Als Bar a place you wanted to be. She is so creative. I said, April Foos Day, I'm having a foosball tournament. And she would make the trophy. She could make a trophy that you wanted so bad because she made it. It's like you wanted Milady's Majesty to present you with that golden arrow on the pillow, right? Like Robin Hood. There was just something about her presentation. And she would decorate for every occasion, you know, adding to the living art that was Als Bar. You could always find her graffiti, STAY-C. I would call her Stay Cool. Hey, Stay Cool. Because I think that's what it meant. She had that Memphis accent, even when she was telling you, you're cut off. It would just sound so beautiful. I love her. I can't say how important she was to the bar. She brought something nobody else brought. There were a lot of reasons that bands loved playing at Al's. It was pretty obvious to everybody in the scene that it was run by bands, for bands. Bands sounded great there. Bands got free beer, and they got paid. Feedback from the crowd like nowhere else. LA is still famous for people just standing there, bands rocking their heart out. And at the end of the show, they're going, they hated us. And people are coming up going, you guys were great. And they're like, I thought you hated us. You didn't move at all. But at Al's, you get people pogoing, dancing, stage diving. Sometimes at other venues, it was more like factory farming, like next. The bands wouldn't even be similar. But at Al's, it was a curated show. It wasn't the same gigs with the same bands that always play together. I think we had one of the first live internet streams. Gus Hudson from Flipside Records came in with a guy named Sasha. They set up cameras for the stage, the bar, and the third room. You could switch and see what Stacy was doing. And then watch the band. Of course, you could hear it as you were watching it. It was way ahead of its time. Not every audience member was in the US. And we were interacting with them. What are you doing? Eating breakfast. And we're like, have a beer for me, you know, and stuff. It was fun. A couple people moved to the American Hotel because we met online through that streaming. Not a lot of people were on the internet at that time or had the bandwidth to watch it. It was still a dial-up era, and people would watch it, but it would stutter. And they were just watching it to, I think, hear the bands. And you could see how many viewers were on it while it was streaming. Gus and Sasha, I think they just used it as a showcase to show their skills of streaming, which was super advanced at that time. Everybody was pretty worried about Y2K. Everybody was freaked out that the grid was gonna go down, and we were trying to stock up on beer. Tom Grimley decided that night he would, instead of showing what was going on live on the Als Bar stream on the internet, he put in a tape of the Los Angeles riots. And everyone thought it was live. They thought that LA was burning again. And it actually was almost like a War of the Worlds type experience where his broadcast created this mass hysteria. And that was a pretty good prank. The flash-induced retinal imaging booth. Of course, if you take a flash picture or someone takes one of you, you see that like the flash bounce drift past your retina. That was the premise of this booth, but people didn't get it because it's structured exactly like an old photo booth. You paid $1 and you pressed the button and it went kapow! And we would switch the slides so it was different shapes and images. And then when you walk away, you see it. Like orange would make purple. It was an interesting project, and people got different experiences with it. Of course, the people on hallucinogens were the ones who got the most out of it, but I get a lot of complaints like, you just blinded me. What the fuck was that? And I'm like, it's art. Suffer. We made a newsletter called the Upside Downtown News. And at first I did one on the back of the Als Bar calendar. So it was just featurettes on the band that was coming. Slug is playing, and if you like car crashes and metal, this is the band for you. Oh, Slug. We had a really good noise scene at Als. If you were one of those fans that liked that kind of music, you thought Als Bar was that kind of venue. What you didn't know is just like once every couple months. Because when it was that night with Slug and Oiler and Rig, man, you better bring your earplugs. People from upstairs would go, what is going on? You're vibrating all the sculptures off of the shelves. It wasn't just rock and roll. It was a huge amount of noise. We definitely had a bunch of homicide detectives that came for happy hour. And I am pretty sure that they went there because they knew their bosses wouldn't be there. They felt like it was their secret. I always thought it was great how the bar, it was almost like a chameleon. The bike messengers would use it as a finish line for their broken spoke race. And if you ask a bike messenger, Als was a bike messenger bar. The arty bands that would play like Sonic Youth, and they would tell you, oh, Als Bar is for art bands. You ask a heavy metal guy, and he would tell you it was a heavy metal bar. They all felt it was their home turf, but all of us knew it wasn't. It was an art district bar that allowed it to be open to interpretation by every group. So it never got too pigeonholed. The Als Bar maniacs. We were not to be reckoned with. What a team. Wow. Stacy coordinated our outfits. So we got these great button-up jerseys, pinstriped, I believe, with red. Of course, you want the lesbians, being that it's softball. We had this German that we talked into playing Bobby. Because she was a lesbian, we thought she'd be good at softball. But she did not know how to play baseball. So she would do these things like, stop at first. No, keep running past first. You think baseball, you know how to play. Everybody knows how to play baseball. At practice, we'd have a keg on second base, trying to encourage our people to at least hit a double at batting practice. The only time we ever won a game was Priority Records, because those guys were smoking doobage in the dugout, and they were so high they couldn't play for shit. And I think that was the one time we won a game. It was a team building experience. There was a healthy consistency of people coming up with ideas of ways to compete with each other. It was a really great way to get artists to interact. Sometimes we'd have this rule that was win by 2 for foosball. So those games would sometimes go until 5 in the morning. We all thought we were so good till we had April Fool's Day and invited the world to come compete with us. And this German guy came in, he was smoking a cigarette with one hand, and I didn't even see where the ball was. I just heard it go into the back of the goal. He was good. It was $5 always to get in, no matter who was playing. There were very few exceptions. And we did set this thing up where if you called up ahead of the gig and tried to use your leverage in the industry to get in, we would put you on what's called an industry list. So you got to the door and Cliff says $5, and you go, I'm on the industry list, and go, okay, what's your name? My name is David Geffen. Okay, you're right, you're on the industry list, $10. So if you wanted to be on the list, you could, but it cost you more. It happened to a lot of people once, and then they just didn't ask to be on the list anymore. Part of the perks of living at the American Hotel was you get into Als for free. Don't underestimate the value of that. The capacity being so small that when bigger bands played, like L7, you could get in. He moved to LA and asked me if he could switch rent for playing happy hour at the bar. And I'm like, that sounds great. We don't have a happy hour, but we could. And Jake said, let me go get my guitar. Started playing. He's the real deal. He learned on a porch in Chicago. Jake traded his little tiny room for playing every night at Als Bar happy hour. That was cool. We had the most hilarious tenant questionnaire. What kind of art do you make? Who inspires your art? What kind of music do you hate? A lot of them thought it was a joke, but they filled it out. It wasn't just who's got the money, here's your room key. I really feel like a little editorial discretion was necessary with the tenants that were living there. And I really did it out of survival mode, but eventually it was a good idea. Almost everyone who lived there was an artist. If not, they were OG. They had been in the neighborhood for a long time. If you weren't an artist, you were a welder, bike messengers. I think there was a lot going on at the hotel I didn't know about. I still don't know who was and who wasn't on heroin at the American Hotel. Apparently it was a big draw. We did try to clean the hotel up of it, but I didn't know Jake was on it. I found out years later that almost everyone, unquote, was on it. They knew to go there if you were looking for it. Don Jones, Dr. Jones. When I first started coming to Als as a patron in a band, you would just hope he stayed for your show. He was the most interesting man in the world. That whole ad campaign had to have been created of somebody who met Don Jones. And he did all the things that they make fun of in the commercials. He was the first white guy I heard speaking Indonesian. I was like, Selamat pagi. And he was like, whoa. You know Indonesian? And I was like, sudah habis, like a very little bit. He went to Borneo to get a tattoo. Wow. I love Don Jones, and everybody wanted his Rolex. He would often have contests. The first to name 5 edible flowers will win this Rolex. And I'd be like, nasturtium, dandelion, time's up. I couldn't win it. Till the day he said, the first of you to name 5 articles of the Constitution wins this Rolex. My mother was a history professor, and if I wanted to eat, I better know the articles of the Constitution. And that's how I won it. He gave it right over. I mean, of course, with pomp and circumstance, like every other thing he did. I can only imagine how he brushed his teeth, because everything was a big deal when Don was in charge. He was like a ringleader at a circus with that mustache. That was how it was presented, and I still have it, and it still runs great. Once I took it to just get cleaned, and the guys, opened it up and said, do you know what you have here? And I said, I do, but I don't think you do. This is Don Jones's Rolex. Even if you've talked about an idea repeatedly, his perspective on it would be so different. They would be like if you've seen pictures of the Statue of Liberty and you never knew the size of it. Maybe you thought it was like this big. And then he goes, and may I introduce? And you look up and it's, a mile high. He's such a huge presence, larger than life. Many tenants told me there were ghosts at the American Hotel. I felt like I saw a black guy a couple times that I knew wasn't a person. Stacy swears you could smell cookies being baked or something. It was pretty spooky. Everybody that lived on the 3rd floor swore there was the ghost of the 3rd floor. It probably was just George. There were some characters at the American Hotel you didn't ask too many questions about. George Sarvis was one of them. What a character. He was the custodian of the American Hotel for a while, and I found out he was an old school gangster that had committed more crimes than even a lot of people were privy to. He told me that it was thrilling. He loved using a gun. He said nothing changes somebody's face like a pistol pointed at it. I asked him, like, well, if it's so thrilling, why aren't you doing stick-ups anymore? Thinking that he would say he was too old. And he said, given the opportunity, I would. He was a total gangster. He admitted that he stole more than he had to because he liked it. He liked to steal. That made me wary of him, but also attracted to him. When he died, he just stopped coming out of his room. He was such a common presence that it was a conspicuous absence when he wasn't lurking through the halls. It was great having that guy in the hotel. Joel! Man, his voice. He would go like, toast! I can't even imitate how deep it was. He was a cameraman in Vietnam, and he shot with a Canon Scoopik. It took me a long time to break through to Joel. He was very suspicious of me until I brought in a Canon Scoopik and I said, look what I bought. It was a camera that he had been intimately familiar with because he pointed that instead of a gun during Vietnam. Everybody that got close to Joel has a story like that where it happened all at once. And it was totally up to Joel. Joel was a typical Chicagoan, South Side Chicago. It's almost like you were never good enough to buy a cigar from his store. How dare you? Some people would go, forget you, old man, and not buy from him. But other people would take it as a challenge. I can hear his voice right now just going, get out. This isn't a library. If you were reading a magazine or just thumbing through it, So, of course, I loved him. A lot of people say he was an asshole, but I don't think he was. He kind of put that character out there, and you either took the bait or you didn't. Joel was the guy who went to the city council meetings, and he got the dash bus to reroute and come through what's now the art district. And that's why it's called Joel Bloom Square, because he made it happen. Of course, he's rolling in his grave with the way it is now, but his intention was that it would be almost a sanctuary section of the city for artists and musicians.
Cut.